welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, our mission is, well, it's pretty focused. We're going to be looking at a stack of sources and research, all surrounding Franz Werfel's massive 1933 novel, The 40 Days of Musa Dagh.
And it is a massive novel.
It really is. It's this exciting but also, devastating modern classic. It explores a tragedy that's almost impossible to comprehend, but at the same time, it's about this moment of just intense, inspiring resilience.
It really is. And it's so much more than just a novel. What we have in these sources is, it's really the roadmap for a literary memorial.
Literary memorial, I like that.
Yeah, Werfel wasn't just, spinning a yarn here. He was building this detailed historical monument, but out of fiction. It was designed to pull the destiny of the Armenian nation, as he put it, from the Hades of all that was.
Wow.
So for us, this deep dive is all about understanding how this fictionalized history became such a profound piece of the global conscience.
Okay, so let's unpack that because it has a really unusual origin story. The sources give us the very specific moment this book was born. Where did the idea actually crystallize for Franz Werfel?
It was March 1929. He was staying in Damascus. Now, Werfel was already a pretty respected writer, but he saw something that just physically and morally arrested him.
What was it?
It was, and this is a quote, "the miserable sight of some maimed and famished-looking refugee children working in a carpet factory."
A carpet factory. That is such a potent, terrible image.
It is.
Not a battlefield, not some government office, but these children.
Yeah.
Survivors of this unimaginable journey, and now they're just reduced to forced labor, weaving. It gave him that final compelling impulse.
Exactly. I mean, it tied the whole abstract idea of genocide to the immediate physical reality of suffering and survival. He was so driven by this that he just researched and wrote the book incredibly intensely between July 1932 and March 1933.
And the sources really emphasize its grounding in history, right? This wasn't just pure imagination.
Not at all. That grounding is so crucial. He didn't treat this material lightly. Our notes show he actually read Chapter 5 of Book 1 publicly during a lecture tour.
And he specifically pointed out that the conversation in it was based on real historical records.
That's right. A genuine conversation between Enver Pasha, who was the Ottoman Minister of War, and a German pastor named Johannes Lepsius.
So he's showing his work, in a way.
Yeah.
He's showing his commitment to being a witness.
He was amplifying, not just fictionalizing, by embedding that documented fact, that, diplomatic failure, right into the book's structure. He gives so much more weight to the fictional resistance that comes later.
And the structure itself reflects that kind of epic ambition.
Oh, absolutely. The story is broken into 3 major sections, and it mirrors that classical arc of tragedy and heroism. Book 1 is coming events, which just sets the stage.
Then you have Book 2, The Struggle of the Weak, which is the impossible resistance itself.
And finally, Book 3, Disaster, Rescue, the End. That's the climax and the profound aftermath.
That structure gives us our roadmap for today. So let's start right there in those coming events, where we meet this highly educated, cosmopolitan protagonist who finds himself just completely unprepared for the world that's closing in around him.
Precisely. We are introduced to Gabriel Belgradian, the man who thinks he is above the whole political mess.
So we open on a scene that feels almost impossibly peaceful. It's a clear Sunday in March, Syrian spring. There are these giant anemones, and you have the golden, almost mythical humming of Musa Dagh, the mountain of Moses.
But the man who's come home to this idyllic landscape is totally detached from it.
He's Gabriel Belgradian, and he is the definition of the assimilated returnee.
He really is. I mean, he's Armenian by blood, by name, but as the sources say, only academically. He spent 23 years living in Paris as a scholar, a man of culture, a bel esprit, an archaeologist, an art historian.
He's fully Europeanized, successful, rich. He's the ultimate outsider, just coming back for, an extended vacation?
Pretty much. He's at the family villa in Yoganuluk, which he inherited from his older brother, Avedis. And Avedis was the one who favored the Oriental nook, as it's called.
Whereas Gabriel has always favored the salon.
Exactly. And that separation from his roots is so meticulously detailed. His wife, Juliette, is French. Their son, Stefan, had to be taught Armenian by a tutor.
Right.
So Gabriel has this intellectual curiosity about his heritage, but there's no deep intrinsic identity, no emotional stake in the fate of the people living down below the mountain. He thinks he can just watch.
And that intellectual distance is exactly what the state apparatus uses against him. The trap just snaps shut with stunning speed. It's the Teskere incident.
That visit to Antioch is the point of no return. Gabriel is trying to be proactive, he goes to see the mutir.
Now, for listeners who don't know, a mudir is basically a minor civil official. But in this isolated place, he holds the keys to Bagration's freedom.
That's right. And Gabriel needs travel papers, the teskere, for his wife and son because he senses they might soon be cut off from the rest of the world.
He's trying to use his European privilege, his wealth, to get them out safely.
But the official's refusal isn't personal. It is purely bureaucratic and lethal. The official already knows all about Gabriel's background.
He brings up his military service.
Yeah, his liability for military service, referencing his status as a Turkish officer from the last Balkan War. Gabriel was hoping his old Aleppo battery had just, forgotten about him.
But they hadn't.
Not at all. The official confirms that since Gabriel is, so to speak, a soldier on leave, there can be no question of any teskere for his family.
And that's the moment. That's when the intellectual threat becomes visceral. His Parisian status, his money, his French wife, none of it matters.
Nothing. All that matters is the label the Turkish state has put on him. Soldier on leave and, critically, Armenian.
The sources point out this is the very first time he feels that cold, stark fear. He thinks, we're in a trap.
And that realization is immediately hammered home when the Kaymakam, the provincial governor, arrives. The Kaymakam just pointedly ignores Gabriel, treats him like he's invisible.
Or already beneath notice. So Gabriel, who's still operating under this illusion of having civil rights, asks the mudir if Turks and Armenians are to be given separate treatment.
And the official, instead of answering, just gives some cryptic reply while tidying his desk. It's the silence, that administrative brush-off, that confirms everything has changed.
He's no longer a cosmopolitan man with an Armenian past.
He's just an Armenian subject.
And then the warnings he gets just cement this reality. This chilling advice comes from a man named Rifat Barakat, a powerful Turkish friend and aga.
He warns Gabriel privately in Antioch that the great and respected among your people will be the first to suffer. And he tells him, just go back to Yoganaluk, stay in peace, and wait.
And this advice is just steeped in this kind of profound passive fatalism that Gabriel, the European rationalist, just completely scorns.
Oh, absolutely. The Aga offers this philosophy. Whatever is to come is there already. What will happen to us has happened already in God.
For Gabriel, who believes in human agency and organization and action, this flowery theological resignation is just infuriating.
He sees it as precisely the attitude that has allowed his people to be oppressed for generations.
It really sets up the central philosophical tension of the entire book, doesn't it?
It does.
Will the Armenian community submit to this fatalism that has defined their relationship with the Ottoman government? Or will they adopt this European model of purposeful, organized resistance?
Exactly. And Gabriel has to choose a side, not just politically, but existentially. He's trapped. He realizes he can't escape his identity, and now he has to decide whether he's going to succumb to the fate others are accepting, or if he's going to use all that useless European knowledge to fight.
The personal trap is closing, and at the same exact time, the national catastrophe begins to arrive right on his doorstep.
Yes, the atmosphere shifts so rapidly from Gabriel's personal anxiety to this overwhelming national terror.
And this terror isn't communicated through newspaper headlines. It's direct, it's physical. It's the arrival of the refugee convoys at the foot of Musa Dagh.
The peace of the 7 villages is just violently shattered. 4 exhausted figures stumble onto the church steps. This group includes Pastor Aram Tamazian, his wife Hofsana, and his sister Iskuhi.
They're the heralds of the disaster. Refugees from the Zaytun area.
And their story is just horrific. Pastor Tamazian, who ran the Protestant orphanage in Zaytun, he recounts the brutality of the sudden evacuation. They were driven out within 24 hours.
And the anguish isn't just the walking, it's the realization of being utterly helpless prey, outside the law, confined to what the sources call a crawling, moving concentration camp that just stretched across the landscape.
And the psychological torture the Ottoman authorities used was, in some ways, even more calculated than the physical abuse. Tamazian talks about how the community was ordered to elect the lucky ones, teachers, church officials who would not immediately join the convoy.
That is just sickening, forcing them to inflict this new acute mental agony on themselves by making neighbors choose who lives and who walks. It destroys the social cohesion of the group before the march even begins.
It's a deliberate policy of atomization.
And the sources spare no detail in describing the conditions of the march. The saptis, the gendarmes overseeing the convoys, they were under stringent orders to meet their scheduled halts.
Which led to extreme brutalization. If people were too sick or just too slow, they weren't carried, they were discarded. Sickness and corpses, especially children's corpses, were just flung into ditches. Not out of cruelty at first, the sources say, but just because keeping burial records became too much work for the state bureaucracy.
The sources move beyond just statistics and give us these shocking, unforgettable anecdotes. We learn about the young men being separated for labor battalions, another way to weaken them, and this educated engineer who just spent his last days gibbering like a half-wit, repeating, "I never miss paying my betel."
Let's pause on the betel for a second, because that historical context is so critical to understanding the betrayal. The betel askeri was a tax traditionally paid by non-Muslim subjects to be exempt from military service.
So by paying this tax for years, the engineer and countless others, they had essentially purchased a financial contract of protection from the state. They were supposed to be safe.
They were supposed to be safe civilian contributors. And now, when the state decided it wanted them gone, that contract was not just worthless, it made them easier targets.
Because they were separated from the military infrastructure. It made them easier to round up and deport as defenseless civilians.
Precisely. His despair wasn't just about losing his family. It was the realization that his entire life's bargain with the state had been a lethal lie. And then we get the story that just crystallizes the absolute lawlessness. The young, newly married couple.
That story is it's difficult to even read. The husband tries a desperate escape, disguising himself in women's clothing, hoping to blend in.
But they're caught by chetas, these armed roughs, irregulars, often recruited from prisons or tribal groups, who were basically given free rein by the state.
And they kill him.
They kill the young husband instantly, and then, in this fiendish mockery of his disguise, they mutilate the body. And then they tie his bride naked to the corpse, face to face,
forcing her to witness and participate in her husband's final humiliation. It's an act of total dehumanization.
Total. It ensures not only death, but the complete destruction of dignity, of any semblance of religious or civil law.
These poor avenging angels, as the sources call them, they didn't just come from one area. They came from Zaytun, Marash, Aintab, Trebizond, Erzurum, Karput, Diyarbakir.
The sheer scale of it, this vast shifting carpet of humanity moving toward Aleppo, convinced the people of Musa Dagh that this was not a localized incident. This was a campaign of elimination. Which
leads directly to the question of whether the West knew and whether they tried to intervene. And the narrative shifts from the suffering on the ground to the high-stakes, dramatic failure of European diplomacy.
And this is where Dr. Johannes Lepsius, the German pastor, comes in. He's already deeply committed, feeling especially sent to these unfortunates since the massacres back in 1896. He travels to Constantinople for a confrontation with the most powerful man in the Young Turk government, Enver Pasha, the Minister of War.
And it's a fascinating detail that Lepsius deliberately dresses in a casual, gray lounge suit. He's signaling that he's not a formal diplomat, but a man of moral clarity, there to deal with what he sees as adventurers.
The contrast is so stark. Enver Pasha is described in our sources as being boyishly charming, but at the same time, a quietly implacable mass murderer.
That dual nature, the charming face of calculated violence, is just terrifying.
And Enver doesn't bother with pretenses. He refuses all concessions. He openly admits the political strategy. The intent is to use the cloak of the ongoing war to extirpate the Armenian millet, the nation.
And he frames it as necessary self-defense.
Exactly. Against citizens who work to destroy the state. He's framing this massive ethnic purge as a political necessity, claiming the Armenians are a disloyal fifth column.
And Lepsius challenges him not just morally, but politically. He asks about the post-war implications, using that incredible biblical reference. How will Turkey negotiate with the Allied powers if faced with the question, where is your brother Abel?
This is the moment where Enver's true nihilistic philosophy is revealed. He dismisses moral consequence entirely. He tells Lepsius that successful politicians need a certain levity or, if you like, indifference to death and unshakable belief in his own decisions.
That quote is the cold logic of ethnic cleansing, just articulated plainly.
It is. It's a refusal to acknowledge accountability, replacing it with the brutal expediency of the state's self-interest. He views human lives as obstacles to be removed by unshakable decision.
So Lepsius, knowing that the region around Musa Dagh had been untouched so far, makes one last desperate plea to spare northern Syria, Aleppo, Alexandretta, Antioch.
And Enver refuses any direct German supervision. And then he makes the ultimate insult. He offers Lepsius permission to collect money, which Enver himself would control, ostensibly for Armenian relief, but with zero foreign oversight.
He's basically asking the German humanitarian to finance the logistics of the deportation machine.
Right. Lepsius leaves Constantinople knowing a world lay shattered. The diplomat's world is finished. There is no hope from the outside. The only choice left is personal action, which brings us right back to Gabriel Bagratión.
So with the external world firmly closed off, no diplomatic help, no safe passage, Gabriel Bagratión's arc moves from indecision and alienation to commitment and action. He has to abandon his Parisian identity and become the commander of his people.
His early unrest, his intellectual dissatisfaction with the situation, it suddenly becomes fruitful and purposeful. The scholarly meticulousness he once applied to classifying, ancient pottery is now applied to calculating survival odds.
He starts investigating. He does his own census, learns that the 7 villages have about 7,000 Christians. That is a massive, daunting population to manage, let alone defend.
And here we find the first great decision point. Gabriel, thanks to his connections and his French wife, he theoretically still had ways to escape.
Through Aleppo, maybe, or consular protection?
Right, however tenuous. But the sources note the compelling magic of Musa Dagh holds him. He refuses to leave.
So why does he stay? Is it guilt? Is it love? Or is it something deeper, like that destiny the Aga spoke of?
I think it's the realization that his life in Paris was empty compared to the existential weight of this crisis. He also refuses to leave because, as he says, he can't shake Juliet out of her fool's paradise, her continued belief that their French connections will save them.
So by staying, he's committing fully to his Armenian fate. He's transforming from an observer to a participant.
And that commitment is physically symbolized when the ultimatum arrives.
Yes, the meteor comes to deliver the official decree. The population must set out eastwards for migration.
And Gabriel doesn't meet him as a scholar or a Parisian. He meets him wearing his field uniform from the Balkan War, symbolizing his renewed identity as a man of military action.
The official clearly identifies Gabriel as a political suspect, subject to closed daily inspection. And Gabriel's reply is his full and final commitment. He echoes the fatalism he once scorned, but transforms it into defiance. I shall go the way of my whole people.
And that moment just galvanizes the local leadership. It leads directly to the Great Assembly, where the chief spiritual leader, the priest Der Kalousdian, and the village Mukhtars, the mayors, they all debate surrender versus resistance.
And everyone knows what the march means, thanks to Temasian's account.
And Gabriel steps forward to offer a concrete, actionable plan. He suggests his own large garden with its high walls as a secure initial assembly place, calling it as good as a strong fortress. This is the European mind applying logic to Asiatic chaos.
But the immediate challenge is organization. I mean, how do you turn 7,000 frightened people into a coordinated defense force?
This is where Pastor Temasian, the refugee, offers his brilliant structural blueprint.
Temasian recognizes that the traditional general council is way too slow and unwieldy for survival. He immediately breaks the entire operation down into 5 efficient committees, with heads chosen by the powerful spiritual authority of Der Kalousdian.
Let's look at those 5 committees, because they really define the 40 days. First, you have defense, which Gabriel is put in charge of. That's the military command.
Then legislation handled solely by Der Kalousdian, the legal and moral framework.
Right. Then you have internal order, public health and sickness, and finally, communal affairs. It's the creation of a miniature, disciplined state designed purely for emergency.
It's the rationalization of chaos. But this push toward rational European-style organization faces a powerful internal counterargument, the voice of pure intellectual fatalism.
And this is Apothecary Krakor, a man of encyclopedic knowledge, a vast personal library who embodies the intellectual resignation of the community. He's highly educated, but his learning has led him to despair, not to action.
He's the one who cites the Turkish proverb, Kismetin ziyade olmaz. Nothing happens unless predestined.
Yes. He sees the world split into 2 groups. Human animals, who produce dung, by which he means politics, war, history, action, and human angels, who possess delight, which he finds in his books.
So for Krakor, resistance is just producing more dung. He argues that action is futile because fate is already written.
And this isn't just a political objection, it's a profound philosophical challenge to Gabriel's very existence. Gabriel, the man who came back to escape the spiritual emptiness of European modernity, finds himself leading a desperate fight against both an external army and this internal ancient belief that struggle is pointless.
That tension between Gabriel's purposeful, organized structure and Krieger's deep-seated cultural resignation is the psychological battleground that has to be won before the physical battle can even begin.
And once that decision to fight is made, the sheer physical and logistical scale of the undertaking is just staggering. The focus shifts entirely to fortifying the mountain, the Dam Lake.
The initial phase is just relentless communal labor. Only the able-bodied, the stronger men, women, and half-grown boys, about 500 men in total, go up at first.
And they're carrying materials from the abandoned villages below, including these long beams from Tamazian's workshop, to build the absolute necessities: the altar, the hospital, and the government hut.
And militarization has to be immediate. The sources detail the importance of people like Chaush Nurhan, an expert in deserters' ways, who is put in charge of munitions and, critically, setting up a cartridge factory using materials from his secret stash in Yugonuluk.
Which just highlights the scrappiness of the defense. I mean, they are not a standing army. They are improvising everything.
And that improvisation requires a radical break from traditional societal norms. Survival necessitates the total communization of resources, which falls under Terhaigasson's authority.
And he implements what the sources call an implacably communist decree.
Let's dive into that phrase, implacably communist. It doesn't mean Bolshevik. It means total nationalization for the sake of survival.
Right. All family stores, grain, coffee, salt, tobacco, must be surrendered for communal distribution.
And this is the second great internal test after Krieger's fatalism. It immediately sparks intense opposition, especially from the wealthier families who just resented being pauperized.
Of course. They had saved for years, and now a priest was ordering their life savings, their survival security, into a common pot.
This resistance just shows that the class divisions within the Armenian community didn't vanish just because a Turkish army was marching on them.
They were still fighting an internal battle between individual security and collective survival.
So how did Terhaigasson enforce it?
He knew how fragile their unity was. To enforce the decree, they posted 5 guards around the communal depot, chosen specifically from the poorest families.
That's a deliberate move.
Absolutely. Right. Using class resentment to enforce revolutionary change, ensuring that those who had nothing were guarding the collective resources against those who once had everything.
The internal friction doesn't end there, though. Gabriel's attempt to establish military order is immediately challenged by the deserter problem,
which is personified by Sarkis Kilikian, the Russian. He is emaciated, educated, and a scornful deserter with extensive trench experience. A real soldier, unlike the scholar Bagration.
And Kilikian has a history of Turkish imprisonment and massacre, so his bitterness is deep and justified.
He challenges Gabriel's leadership directly. He says, with total contempt for this privileged Parisian, I may come, and again I may not. I really don't know what I'd care to do.
He survived worse. He despises the idea of being saved by a man who only just rediscovered his roots.
This is a pivotal moment for Gabriel. He can't lecture this man. He has to command him. He uses his officer uniform and sheer cold willpower to assert authority, resorting to public humiliation, calling Kilikian a skulking coward of a deserter to provoke a submission.
And it works.
It works. Kilikian submits, whispering, I want to stay. Gabriel, recognizing the man's military value but fearing his nihilism, assigns him to the formidable South Bastion under the command of the aggressive teacher, Rand Askanian.
The sources describe Kilikian's placement there as a poisoned thorn, designed to enforce discipline through sheer antagonism.
And with the internal structure barely established, the external attacks begin. The first battle on August 4th is a stunning success, largely due to Gabriel's tactical control and the enemy's arrogance.
The Turkish captain, clearly underestimating them, assumed it was a job for the local police and approached the North Saddle without precaution.
And Gabriel's order was absolute. Remain invisible and silent. They waited until they could not miss its mark. The result: they annihilated the Turks and critically captured material weapons and ammunition, which were their lifeblood.
But the Turks immediately escalate. By August 11th, they return with significantly superior numbers.
This battle is much harder. There's intense fighting and the famous, almost miraculous landslide on the South Bastion, which provides this moment of what feels like divine intervention for the defenders. They repel the attack. The cost is high. Over 100 families lose members. The reality of sustained warfare sets in.
And the conflict isn't just tactical, it's moral. After the August 11th attack, the defenders capture 9 soldiers and a young officer.
And the community, still burning with the memories of the massacre convoys, memories brought by Tamazian, they demand brutal revenge.
But Gabriel insists on restraint.
He understands that if they devolve into massacre, they forfeit any moral claim to be considered anything other than rebels. He sends the officer back with a message. We want to be let live up here in peace. That's all we want. He is fighting for legitimacy and for the soul of the resistance, not just survival.
But legitimacy doesn't provide food. The decline starts not because of Turkish might, but through shocking negligence.
The great resource theft is the turning point. The village Mukhtars, the mayors, negligently allowed the communal herds of sheep, goats, donkeys to graze outside the camp perimeter without an armed guard.
A huge mistake.
A catastrophic mistake. Turkish platoons and saptis sweep in and steal virtually all the livestock, cutting the nerve of the defense. The community calculates they have enough remaining food for only 3 or 4 more days before stark famine sets in.
And this immediate resource crisis unleashes all that latent internal bitterness. Rand Alskanian, the commander of the South Bastion, who was already aggressive, he seizes this moment to agitate for the internal mutiny.
He weaponizes the class resentment that had surfaced during the implacably communist decree. He agitates fiercely against the leadership, particularly Gabriel and the Bagratians, claiming the rich families were responsible for all the troubles.
So the authority structure starts to crumble, and all hope rests on the spiritual leader, Kalousdian. He confronts the surging, angry crowd at the altar and demands a choice.
This is perhaps his most powerful moment of psychological leadership. Instead of commanding them to fight, he asks for a vote on surrender. He tells them he is perfectly willing to go down straight away to Yoganaluk. And the sources describe this moment of profound, paralyzing silence. 2 full minutes where not one hand stirs. The reality of walking willingly into the convoys is far more terrifying than facing the Turkish bullets.
They're shaken out of their rage by the cold, hard consequence of their demands.
Exactly. Tarhaigason reasserts discipline, threatening to punish disorder as treason. He temporarily averts disaster, but the unity is permanently scarred.
So the struggle now enters its final phase, defined by famine and the collapse of the social contract. They're in the last days, and all previous organization just begins to dissolve under duress.
The sources describe the physical decline with grim detail. Famine sets in fast. The women are reduced to finding unnutritious herbs. Mortality rates soar, peaking at 43 deaths in a single evening. The burials are no longer carefully managed. They're laid out in rows on the bare rock of the dish terrace. The people just sink into deep exhaustion and apathy.
And meanwhile, the intense pressure causes the personal relationships to fracture. The love triangle involving Gabriel, Juliet, and his Kuibaster Aram's sister plays out against this backdrop of collapse.
Gabriel is drawn to Iskuhi's spiritual strength and her connection to the Armenian people, while Juliet, who is ill with fever, clings to her French identity and her European connection.
And that European connection, Gonzaga Maris, a young European in the camp, becomes part of a final, desperate betrayal.
And this is where the orphan Sado, driven by malice and curiosity, becomes the camp's chief spy. She observes the illicit liaison between Juliet and Gonzague, who's sleeping in Stefan's bed in the sheikh tent.
The personal corruption just spills over into the final tragic communal collapse on the 39th day, the final mutiny and fire.
The deserters, now fully desperate, attack 3 Tent Square, trying to loot any remaining private stores, sardines, chocolate. The violence is frenetic. Shushik, the mother of the scout hike, is killed trying to defend the supplies. Pastor Aram is bayoneted rushing the mob with his stick.
And the violence culminates at the altar square, where hunger and rage push the great spiritual leader, Tarhaigason, into a violent delirium.
He had carried the weight of the entire community, the legislation, the moral burden, the fear of surrender. Now, under intense stress, he suffers a psychotic break. He sees a delusion of Sarkis Kalikian, or perhaps an internal projection of his own violent impulse, in the leaf screen of the altar, and attacks his congregation with a silver candlestick.
It's the final, terrifying breakdown of order, morality, and sanity.
The mutineers then set the camp on fire, which burns wildly, and the people, famished and defeated, they sink into what's called the peace of annihilation, just too exhausted to move or fight. The resistance is functionally over.
And amidst this total despair, Gabriel Bagratian receives the final shattering news that his son Stefan has died while trying to carry a desperate letter to the American consul Jackson in Alexandretta.
The man who came home for his son loses his son at the moment of the greatest crisis.
But despite this overwhelming grief, his European discipline just takes over. He concentrates only on the immediate tactical task. He has to move the remaining people down to the shore and prepare the last howitzers for one final, desperate line of defense.
But before that, he has to end the anarchy caused by the mutiny.
Which brings us to the most difficult moral moment for Gabriel. The repentant deserters bring Sarkis Kilikian back, bound. Kilikian, the nihilist, the man who had survived a childhood massacre and a Turkish firing party, must now be dealt with by the leader he scorned.
And Gabriel understands that they can't survive the rescue if it comes in a state of chaos. Order has to be reestablished at any cost. He struggles, but for the survival of the remaining community, he executes Kilikian at point-blank range.
It is the ultimate act of necessary ruthlessness. The assimilated European scholar has completed his transformation into the ruthless, singular commander who places the survival of the group above individual morality or any legal process.
He had to kill the symbol of nihilistic despair to save the faithful.
And then, the miracle. On the 40th day, as the people huddle at the shore, they are roused by the crack of doom, the sound of naval guns. The French cruiser Guichen has arrived.
Alerted, we realize, by Stefan's desperate, successful mission.
The Guichen immediately begins firing on the Turkish positions. The sources describe the delegation ferried to the ship, Torhaygason, Dr. Altuni, and Hapeth Shatakian. And here, Torhaygason reveals his secret.
He speaks fluent French, which he had concealed for years.
It's an incredible revelation. The spiritual leader, who seems so rooted in the local life, possessed the perfect tool for salvation and only unveiled it at the critical moment of intervention.
He begs for immediate help, confirming the famine and the desperate state of the 7,000. The French and English navies are deeply moved by the tale of the heroic encampment. Shortly after, the flagship Jeanne d'Arc, followed by other English and French cruisers, arrives. They begin the evacuation immediately.
But the logistics of salvation carry a final bureaucratic irony. A special medical commission, including Torhaygason, organizes the embarkation. They classify every Armenian for lice and disease, separating the sick and enfeebled onto the transport steamer.
So they escape mass death and the brutal, lawless violence of the Ottoman Empire, only to be subjected to the clinical judgment of European bureaucracy.
It's an antiseptic final indignity, a reminder that even salvation comes with strings attached, that they are now subjects of Western categorization and charity, not free citizens.
And Gabriel remains on the shore, helping with the final efforts. Torhaygason approaches him and offers the final word of the community. Your duty's finished. Go with God's blessing and rest.
But Gabriel can't go. His duty may be finished to the commune, but not to the man he has become.
He experiences this intense consciousness of power, finding his cosmic hermitage. The Parisian scholar is dead. The real Bagradian come to life in the 40 days. He could not survive the mediocrity of a refugee camp.
He's found his ultimate freedom, not in Europe, not in survival, but in the destiny he created on that mountain.
So he turns away from the departing ships and the saved people and deliberately walks up the sheer, empty, newly created rocky slope of Musa Dagh. He realizes he had to pass through the penfold of a commune, really, to become so an individual.
He sacrificed his European life, his family, and finally his son to become this leader. And that commander cannot simply transition back to civilian life.
His final defiant thought just encapsulates his transcendence. Every breath was an intoxication of freedom. The ships departed, and Gabriel stayed on this rocky slope. Only God and Gabriel Bagradian.
The sacrifice is complete. The assimilated European had to embrace his national fate and lead a communal struggle to truly discover himself as a solitary, ultimately free individual.
And that transformation is the genius of Werfel's novel. The resistance itself, defined by organizational discipline and ruthlessness, was European in practice. But the profound spiritual and moral commitment that fueled it was purely Armenian. Gabriel finds the truest expression of freedom not in the rescue, but in his final, conscious refusal to be saved.
It's just an astonishing trajectory from indifference to ultimate sacrifice that defined the 40 days on Musa Dagh. You see the contrast between individual survival, Juliet, Iskui, the people leaving for Alexandria, and the leader's choice to remain forever with the destiny he created.
Franz Werfel was inspired by the tragedy of a nation, but when a struggle is defined not only by the number of days you hold out, but by that ultimate personal decision of whether to return to life or stay forever with the destiny you forged, what does true victory look like?
And which Bagradian, the cynical European scholar who scoffs at fatalism, or the solitary commander who found his freedom in death, found the truer definition of the soul? Something for you to ponder as you reflect on the heroic encampment on the Mountain of Moses.